this section here so you can see the screen, that would be awesome.
I might be able to.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm up for it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good
Enjoy
morning,
the
everybody.
celebration.
Thanks for taking some time. I know it's obviously never a convenient time to have a meeting, but here we are. It's good to see you all, and I appreciate everything that you've done up to this point in being patient with us, as well as your prayers as we go forward. But let's open in prayer. Dear Father, we thank you so much for everything you have done for this church, through this church, and we thank you for everything that you are going to do through this church, Lord. And we pray that you will guide us, guide our thoughts, help us to submit to you and to your will as we listen to you and how we can better serve you through this community and through this church. In Jesus' name, amen. So we have a presentation here. We have invited our architect, Michael Campbell, here, and he's going to present some things that he has found. Shane, could you go to the next slide? Thanks. Just as a little setting the stage again, if you recall, back in the fall, we made the decision to go out and solicit the services of an architect, and we put together a request for proposals, and we had several responses to that. And if you recall as well, we presented to you in another church meeting the proposal that we felt was the best and met our needs, and it was from Michael Campbell, and we did go ahead and engage in moving us forward and helping us to move forward. When we had originally asked him to prepare a proposal, we had some very specific things that we wanted him to look at and to prepare a proposal for, and that kind of set the stage for how we selected him.
That's the next one.
Yeah, go to the next slide, Shane. And these are some of the goals that we had, right? We wanted to, obviously, we need to create a new worship space. We wanted it to be a flexible space that we could use for a variety of different formats and whatnot. Focused mainly on the interior worship space, try to maintain the underground, maintain the electrical systems, and maintain the front facade, and hopefully to begin construction sometime later this year. And so that was the basis of the proposal. And again, Michael's been working with us now for several months, and he's got some really cool, incredible news for us that I think hopefully will be seen as a blessing, right? Because we made this assumption based on the premise that we were gonna demolish the existing building, right? The roof was gonna come off, had to come off. The walls were gonna come down, and we were gonna build something completely new. Well, as we listen to Michael speak to us, we have learned that that may not have to be the case. And we may be able to preserve the walls and the roof. And with some modifications to those things, we can preserve it all. And that does several things. Mainly being it saves us a lot of money, which is again a blessing. And it allows us to focus even more on the interior systems, interior worship space. How do we want that to look? And that's what Michael, our architect, is going to present to us. It's ideas, right? And he's got two options that he's going to show you, and I think it's very important for us to understand that it's not pick one or the other. It's just a collection of ideas that are kind of grouped together into two options, but look at it as sort of an open slate for what you can do inside, taking any number of ideas out of the concepts that he shows you. And that's what we're going to talk about after Michael is done. What are those things that you like about the old worship space, this space, what works, what doesn't work, because we really want to spend time focusing on how we create a worship space that meets the goals, which is the prior slide, Shane.
No, it's that one.
Which meets our goals as we move forward. And that's, it's always good to put a mission statement in front of any meeting, right? So that we stay focused and not sort of stray off. But to inspire the growth and sharing of God's love through genuine, meaningful relationships with each other and our community. And how do we create a space that enhances worship, enhances our mission, our ministries, and our community outreach. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, our architect. He's going to show you a lot of different concepts, and hopefully you can see them as they're shown on this screen. And if not, there's a little space to move even a little closer if you want. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, and appreciate the opportunity to be involved with your project and your rebuilding. And I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of Methodist churches in South Jersey and Cinnamonson and Vineland, Cape Courthouse, and Absecon, and a few others over the years. I've had several meetings with your team, and I've been on site and kind of climbed around on the scaffolding and did some investigating and reviewed the documents from that'd be great. If you don't mind, I'll remove my mask so you can hear me. So I've been on site, investigated. I've had a structural engineer review. He hasn't been on site yet, but reviewed my observations and photographs of everything that's going on here, and also had a contractor here that I work with and trust on sort of complicated projects like this. Okay, so we already advanced. So this is the photograph of your sanctuary as it is now, with the temporary scaffolding, which is keeping everything in place. Because as you know, when the solar system was added to the roof, that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. In my reviewing everything, it looks like the roof system was sort of a bit undersized to begin with when it was originally constructed, and could even see there were some period repairs to the trusses, the top rafters of the system were bowed, and they had reinforced those during the original construction. But it was, doing fine, doing its job until the solar was added. And it seems like the main problem was the point loading of that. Not the system itself, but when they were installing it, the large pallets of solar panels put on the roof collectively caused problems. So my observations were that, and again, I think this is something from just time and the system maybe being a bit under designed to begin with, but the walls here are sort of bowed front to back. They're vertical here, they're plumb here, but then as you get to the middle of the sanctuary, from those trusses failing and bowing out, they've kind of pushed the top of the wall out a bit, but not a great deal. It's I think the wall's about 18 feet high, and the bowing at the center, at the worst point, is about 4 inches out of plumb. And then you can kind of see in here, most of the failure in the trusses is at this connection along here, because the bottom cords of the truss are in tension, so when they're overloaded, it breaks along the grain of the wood. So that's kind of the basics of what's there now. And we kind of have to approach it objectively, and if the system wasn't going to work as it is, then it's got to go. But I did want to find a way to keep this roof, because I just know everything that would be involved in rebuilding this. It would get pretty expensive, especially with prices going up so much in construction and construction materials the past year or two. So I did have that in the back of my mind. If I could find a way to keep it, that would be a good thing. So anyway, I was looking over the system. I climbed up on the trusses and climbed up in the attic space above here, the catwalk, and I'm looking at what was done as part of the remedial work to stabilize everything. And there was a good amount of framing added. You can kind of see it here between the ceiling joists or the bottom cord of the truss. There was a wall built the length of that walkway, front to back, with diagonal bracing to stabilize everything and to transfer the load from the roof down to these bearing points on the truss work that or the scaffolding. Usually scaffolding is in a building for access to higher places, but here it's primarily there to support the existing roof and keep it from failing further. So I'm looking at that system, looking at the bracing and everything that was done, and I thought, maybe the best thing to do would be just to use structural steel beams to replace the job that this scaffolding is doing right now. So, to do that, there's two options, and in the drawings that'll come up, there's two options for the ceiling, and basically two options for the floor plan, and an option to expand the narthex. And as far as moving forward and getting into the next stage when you're ready for that, which is the construction drawings, really the decisions to make are, do you want to move that narthex wall forward, and do you want to have, either of the two ceiling configurations. The sanctuary layout is really not as critical for developing those construction drawings. Would want to decide before going out to bid, but that can be kind of deferred for more discussion. And that usually is the most discussion. I always say the design of the platform, the sanctuary, there's as much discussion about that as there is designing the whole rest of a new church, because so much goes on there. So my solution to keep the existing roof, and it's not just the roof, it's all the heating and air conditioning system, everything that's going on up there, we can keep in place. So my solution is to run steel beams side to side, and it can either be a horizontal beam or a segmented arch beam. If you've ever been to the fellowship hall, at Absecon United Methodist Church. It's got that kind of tray ceiling, and that's how it's put together. There are segmented steel beams that follow the profile of the roof. And so there would be a beam in between each window, bearing on these concrete block walls that are already there, and then posting up to these points where the scaffolding is currently doing the work. Any questions so far on that part?
So my understanding was we were originally told that we probably would not be able to save the building because if they tried to shore it up, that no insurance company would insure it. What is different now that we're doing that we think we're going to be able to insure this building if we try to save it?
Yeah, I don't know about an insurance company. I don't know if I've heard that that was their position or where that information came from. Sometimes information does come from sources that if you check other sources, maybe might get a different opinion. But it would be a repair or stabilization that would be signed off on by an architect, a structural engineer, and approved by the building department. So I don't see how a insurance company would not insure that. Again, I don't have that information firsthand, so I'm not really sure, and maybe that could be part of the discussion after if somebody knows exactly where that came from. But not questioning it, but just my experience. I've done a lot of rebuilds after disasters, like after Hurricane Sandy, helping to rebuild some structures and rebuilding a Methodist church in Jersey City that had a catastrophic fire, and all that was left was the masonry. There was nothing left. And we used the existing steel beams, our columns, and the existing masonry roof, and of course the roof was completely gone there, so we replaced that. So that would be my experience, but of course, if that's definitely the case, then we need to consider that.
Push the down button.
The down button, do I need to point it at the computer? Okay.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Sure.
So if we did this, would that, because the building is kind of bowed right now, in the shoring it up, does it pull it back in? You said it's like off by 4 inches on each side now at the worst spot.
That was my one concern. It was really just an aesthetic concern, because to me as an architect, if a wall is slightly out of plumb, I see it. It catches my eye. That's what I'm looking for as an architect. So if we did stay with this solution and kept the existing roof, the existing walls, we might be able to correct that some, because part of the solution is to have these steel beams across the top to support the trusses, but also to have a through bolt through to the outside of the building and have a steel channel along the top of the wall and through bolted each beam. So there would be a continuous steel channel on the top of the wall, keeping that wall stable and intact. And we might be able to crank it in a bit and get it a little bit more towards plumb, but I don't think we'd be able to get a masonry wall completely plumb. And there would be some other remedial work with that. Like I would call for all the cells in the concrete blocks, and these walls are hollow. So wherever there's bearing, I would call for rebar and filling the cells with grout solid all the way up. And also, I'm kind of like belt and suspenders with this stuff. I'm thinking of attaching steel tube columns to the wall underneath where the beams are bearing, just so we can have additional through bolting and just kind of tie everything together and keep everything stable. And yeah, I did run all this past a structural engineer, and he was okay with it. He would sign off on it. Okay, these, my draftsman kind of got carried away and went more into technical drawings than just design drawings. So these drawings are showing what would be removed if we were going with this first solution, which would be pretty much clearing out and taking away the existing raised platform with all those steps that are there. So that would be the demolition plan. And this, again, this option 1, we're calling it, it's pretty much taking the existing sanctuary and setting it up as you have this now. As the room is about the same proportions, and it seems like this is a nice layout that a lot of people like. So so that's what we're showing here, and there's no loss in seating or anything, and just gives you a lot of versatility with the sanctuary. You can have it laid out this way. We talked about different kinds of stages. There are commercially made portable stages. It doesn't really work to make something out of wood framing and putting on wheels because it just gets so heavy. It's not practical. Whenever I've seen portable stages like that in a church, they never get moved. They're there. But you can, so you would have a lot of flexibility to have the stage here or at the back of the sanctuary. And it might be hard to see some of these slides, but I do have a set of drawings here. If anybody wants to gather around the table afterwards and take a look at them, we can do that too. And this is showing the outside of the building. And the only thing we're showing here is we've talked about various ways to make these narthex, the foyer, nicer and brighter and more welcoming. And one of those things is to take the existing solid doors out and put glass and aluminum doors in for those existing 4 doors. And it would make it a lot more open and inviting. Sort of thing in new church these days, new church design these days is that the entrance kind of be transparent because some people aren't familiar with church. They want to kind of know what's on the other side of that door before they walk in. So, and it's just nice at night too. You have lights on inside and people can see from the outside something's going on. And so this is a section cut through the building lengthwise and then crosswise. So we're showing option 1 for the floor plan here, and we're showing the first option for steel beams to support the existing trusses. And this is, it's arched and segmented, but that would be one continuous steel beam and really would act just the same as a regular steel beam that's horizontal and flat. And it would post up to the bearing points of the truss, and also there would be framing. There's existing framing here, each side of the walkway, but we would call for additional framing up to existing trusses. So actually the trusses really wouldn't act as trusses anymore. We would just be capturing all those loads and transferring them down to the steel at all the bearing points. And just a close-up of that section, again, showing the segmented steel arch, showing posting up to the existing trusses. And again, this is probably hard to see from back there, but having through bolts at the end of that steel beam going to the outside of the building to really capture the top of that wall and keep it from bowing further, and if possible, bringing it a little more towards plumb. And also when I got here, I'm looking around, I see you got this existing built-in gutter, and they're really never a good idea. They leak and they're a constant source of problems. So in doing all this, it might be a good idea to just take that out and put regular perimeter gutters in. Oops, sorry. So these are some artist renderings, just basic, as the project develops further, we'll develop these in more detail and make them nicer, but this is the sanctuary in this first option, showing a stage on the side and the circular seating around. And again, it's just, very open, very versatile that way. And then another picture looking from the stage back to the seating and the audience. Okay, so this is the second option for the floor and the ceiling. And also within this is a design for the narthex that could be either part of solution 1 or solution 2. So as far as demolition here, here we'd be keeping the existing stage, but just simplifying it. Not so many steps up and down in the back, and just 2 steps up in the front. And this is, again, some of this doesn't show well on the screen, but this is the stage, pretty much as it is, a bit smaller because the sanctuary is smaller, and just 2 steps up and then an open stage. So again, it's open and it's versatile. You can have musical dance productions up there, that sort of thing. And we are showing enlarging the narthex up to in between the first 2 windows in the sanctuary. And in doing that, most of the space would be left open to the existing ceiling. So it'd be a nice narthex space. It'd be a lot more open, a lot more inviting, and a lot more spacious because for the most part, or half of the narthex, the new part of the narthex, would be open up to the ceiling of the church. And in the middle of that, as we've been talking about the sound booth and controlling the sound system, having an elevated sound booth, it would sort of be like a bridge over this expansion of the narthex. So the people controlling the light and sound can sit in an elevated booth in the back of the sanctuary. It just makes for an interesting space to have this open full height on the sides and then have this bridge going over for the sound people.
So the people in the narthex would be able to see the people that were the sound in this?
Well, we can talk about that in detail. My first thought is just to have a solid railing, like a 3.5 foot railing around the sound booth, so you wouldn't really see people up there. So it depends how much privacy they want up there. You know, I work with a lot of churches, and the sound people always have their own preferences, how they want to be situated, you know, and they want to be elevated or on the floor level, or you know, to the right or left. So that's something to consider in detail. But at very least, there would be like a solid railing around them, so you're not really seeing them when you're walking around underneath. And this is a section, again, showing a different solution to stabilizing the trusses with simply using a horizontal steel beam and then posting up to the existing roof. And if something this would do would kind of create an interesting architectural feature, because you would have like an exposed truss. The steel beams and supports we would wrap in sheetrock or wood casework, and so you'd have like this exposed truss supporting the existing roof. So, I originally thought this would be a lot more economical solution, but the more I thought about it, I think it's pretty much the same either way, because doing it this way, horizontal beam is simpler, but then we need to post up, and then we need to clad all those supports. The segmented steel beam might be a little bit more expensive, but once it's up, it's simpler to finish and to transfer the loads to the existing structure. Then again, a blow up of that section through the roof, showing the horizontal beam and the vertical supports here, and the tie-in to the top of the wall. And then the 3D rendering of this solution. So again, you have the exposed trusses here, and more could be done to this. Horizontal members could be added to make it look more like a traditional truss. And another advantage of this is it's a good place to add stage lighting along these trusses here. And this is facing towards the back of the sanctuary, and this would be that sound booth elevated, and this would be, excuse me, this would be the new wall between the first two windows in the back of the sanctuary, and it would be full height between the narthex and the sanctuary. Yeah, another concern you're talking about the sound booth being open is maybe a means to close this also, so you don't have the sound of people talking in the narthex coming over to the sanctuary and vice versa. And this is the artist view of the front of the sanctuary. And we haven't talked about this in detail and how much of the original woodworker design we would be restoring. There is an existing chimney here that we need to work around. The good thing about the existing construction is it's all concrete slab front to back. And sometimes when they built churches, they would they build the floor of the sanctuary, and then the altar area would be a whole elevated construction. It would be different construction. But here they just built the slab front to back and then wood framing on top of that for the platform. So it makes it easy to renovate and do different things there. And I think that is it.
Okay.
I haven't heard you mention the balcony.
The-
Balcony still there?
The balcony? My understanding the balcony is not used for much now. It would stay in place, and that would be the way the sound people would get up to that bridge that I talked about. But we've talked about mostly just leaving that as storage.
In the first option, we could still preserve the balcony, but I think as Michael said, and we've talked about, there wasn't a lot of use of it over the last, even prior, so it's something to talk about, what is it important, as we move forward to keep it or not? At this point, it's up in the air.
No pun intended.
Are there any other questions for the presentation you saw? Yes, Dave.
Two things. In either option 1 or 2, is it possible for the organ to be moved back and used in the sanctuary?
There's nothing that would preclude the organ from being put in either scenario, depending on where it is.
Yeah, it's an electric organ, so
Yeah.
it can really go anywhere, based on the configuration of the sanctuary.
Yeah, and those are things that we will have to continue to talk about, from music holistically, right? Not just the organ, but how does our praise band, where does it go? Where does a choir go? We're used to the traditional, there's a choir loft, and the bell choir was the one thing that did sit, was up in the balcony, right? But there's, as you saw, especially on the side-to-side configuration, there's a lot of space around that you could utilize and put music, things in different places and continue to deliver the same level of worship. Yes?
Second question. In the artist rendering of the interior seating, in option 1, it had this type of arrangement.
Right.
That lets you see other people. And then in option 2, it had the more traditional, just pews back of each other. Was that a function of the structures of the two options, or just the artist chose to show? In other words, could you use the seating arrangement in both option 1 and option 2?
You could, what we've been talking about is kind of, another option is just leaving the sanctuary completely versatile. So you could have seating like this, or you could have, more traditional, like basilica front to back seating.
Okay.
And it could even change, from week to week. If a wedding is coming in and they want the traditional seating front to back, you could do that. And if you want to switch back to this for worship, then you could do that.
And with chairs, you're more flexible.
Exactly.
Views.
Yeah, and I think, as you know, we sold got rid of the pews, right? So,
Yep.
and we bought all of these chairs, so the plan is these chairs are going to be over there, and yes, they're flexible, we can move them around as needed. And again, going back to the beginning, options are, again, maybe a slight misnomer, because again, it's different. As you noticed, in one option, we maintain some semblance of the front area, right, where it would be a raised platform, whereas in the other, that came out completely. Certainly, if you kept the platform up there and tried to set up like this, you would lose a little bit of seating capacity, but there's nothing that says that you couldn't try to do that as well, have a front stage area. Again, if you wanted to have a traditional wedding type setup, and then have a side to side for, the weekly worship service.
How many feet is the wall of the narthex going to be pushed back?
I don't know exactly. It's, what's the distance from the existing narthex wall to in between the first two windows? So it'd be centered on those first two windows. So it's
Been such a long time since you've been in.
The other thing about the narthex is that we were also exploring the notion of getting rid of that set of stairs that's in the front, that's right by the narthex, that's the other way down to the underground. If we got rid of that, we get to then level that off, create even all the space that 4 feet of stairs was taking up, and then expand it not just across, but also into the existing sanctuary space.
Good idea. Those stairs probably aren't the code anymore anyway.
Yeah, we haven't, we have another way downstairs that is not inconvenient, so having to just close that off is not a problem.
And since that other addition connecting the buildings and providing the elevator, that second way down to the basement is not needed as a fire exit, because there's the other exit now. And
Two other stairs.
My eyeball's telling me about 8 to 10, or 8 to 10 feet roughly, or maybe a little.
yeah, it's about 10 feet, maybe a little bit more. And like you're saying, maybe they shouldn't be called options for the sanctuary, because kind of like an option could be to not have an option, to just have it open, and it's however you want to use it.
Yeah, like a menu of items that we could select.
I like this, I like that, and this one.
It's kind of a la carte is what it is.
Yeah.
So I think the two big options that Michael was trying to provide was really that we can save the roof, we can save the existing structure, and it's really the metal beams that are installed, right? And those were the two options, and then from there, the artists, I think, kind of said, okay, well, here's what it could look like if you did this. Here's what it could look like if you do that. At its root, it's really the blessing that we can save the roof, make sure that it's insured and safe, and then say, okay, inside now we can actually spend some time and look at how we would want this space, to look similar to this, similar to what it was previously, to something we haven't seen before. And I think these internal options, I think it was more about the roof, to look at the roof beams versus specifically what the ground level would look like.
Right, yeah,
Kathy has a question.
yes.
I'm just having a hard time understanding, when we first looked at this, we looked at putting metal said it can't be done. And if we do something like this, are we just patching, or is this gonna be strong enough and going to last for us? I'm just, like I said, I thought we'd gone through this and we looked at some of the options he's mentioning and it was not doable. So I don't understand, what's the difference from before and now?
Yeah, I would just say I'm kind of approaching this fresh, and engineers just, you know, you can get 4 engineers to look at something and they're all gonna say something different, and a lot of engineers are very risk averse, you know, and then they're just gonna default to there's no liability involved in saying tear it all down and rebuild it. And you know, to me, I don't really see any risk in keeping it and doing these measures that I spoke of.
I mean,
So
the
that's,
layman's
yeah, I
terms,
did
the
hear
building-
that, and that's all I can think is they were just being very conservative in their determinations.
Just thinking in layman's terms, you're just building a steel box inside of the brick structure. I mean, that's basic, but you're putting a steel frame inside of what's already there, and the steel frame becomes the structure instead of the cinder block walls.
Well, you both. I would be bearing on the concrete block walls, but also adding those tubes, and it's just all redundancy. But that is correct. It's a steel frame to support what is there now, and kind of structurally writing off the existing trusses and just posting up to all the bearing points and reinforcing.
And Kathy, the other thing too is that when we were having several of those conversations, we were also in active litigation. So I can imagine that people would be even more conservative in terms of what the solutions might be, because there hadn't been any settlements yet. There hadn't been, you know, the insurance company was actively disclaiming us, you know, the solar panel company was actively disclaiming us. And so I think that can be a lens through which people make decisions as well.
Yeah, that is true when architects or engineers are writing a report for the purposes of litigation. You're being your client's advocate, so you're painting worst case scenario, you know, for liability concerns, but also to be your client's advocate. You know, in case they need to go to that level of reconstruction, they're going to be prepared for that.
Again, I'm just concerned that we keep talking about this is cheaper way to do this, but I just wanna make sure that that's not why we're doing it, because it's cheaper. Are we really considering that this is gonna be something that will last, and is gonna support those walls, and is, you know, not just a patch, that's all.
Yeah, it's definitely not a patch, you know, it's again, I think of myself as pretty conservative when it comes to these things. Like I said, I'm belt and suspenders, so you know, maybe we don't need those tube columns on the wall, but I want to add them for redundancy. In the back.
So 2 things. I understand we're not dealing with like the nitty-gritty of stuff because that can all be figured out later. You know, we're not picking carpet today. We're at the top level. So the 2 things on that, as far as the balcony is concerned, one of the big things that I like to have people keep in mind when we're dealing with laying out the new sanctuary is for weddings, because I think weddings is one of the huge, most important things that churches do on a regular basis. And having a balcony available to a videographer to go up there, whichever direction you're facing, you know, but being able to have people up there with video equipment for the wedding or for if the South Jersey Pops are performing or whatever, I think we need to have that space up there usable, not just for these great guys over here, but for other people who may need to come in to do stuff. I mean, maybe the South Jersey Pops need to put somebody up there, I don't know. So that's the one thing I'd like to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't know if either one of these optional layouts would preclude this or not. But my mom would like to highly recommend we put in a baptistry. And I'm prepared to discuss why, if we need to. But I don't know if like plumbing for a baptistry would work with both of these options, or if only one of them would work for that. Or...
It depends what kind of baptistry you want. If you want like a full immersion baptistry, like you walk up and in, which we often put into churches, and we always go with the prefab ones, because building them on site is not a good idea, and making sure they're waterproof. But the prefab ones, you can go online and like Fiberglass Specialties is one manufacturer, and they have probably like 20 different kinds you can look at, but they're all pretty much self-contained. I mean, they have a pump, they have a filter, they have a heater, so you just need a cold water supply to them and a drain out of them, if you ever need to drain it for any reason.
And you think you could put that in regardless of which way you like orient the sanctuary?
Yeah, it would just be a matter of working out the placement of it. But I've said it's kind of funny about this structure is I think the roof was kind of over-designed, but then the sanctuary floor I think is kind of over-designed. It's like you could park a car in there, and it's pretty substantial. But one more thought I forgot about the options of completely rebuilding versus trying to keep what's here. And of course, the first thing is budget. It would be very, very significantly higher to rebuild everything. By a few million probably. But also, you're going from repair to rebuilding. So it's a new building, so it's got to meet the new code. So it means it needs to have a sprinkler system. You need to bring a line in, dedicated line in from the street, and all those things get pricey as well. And also the way planning boards have become much more, or in particular the town engineers have become much more scrutinizing of looking at everything that gets built. You would be building up on the existing footprint, but my experience is the way things are lately, you would have to go to the planning board for that also, because it's an all new structure, and that adds a significant amount of time to the process, like at least a year to get through the planning board. So those are just some more of my thoughts in evaluating the whole situation.
Yes, ma'am.
Would we be maintaining the solar system, the solar panels rather?
Yeah, the idea, if they're functioning and there's not a problem with them, my intent would be to keep everything that's there. Keep the existing roof trusses. Only thing, like I mentioned, it'd probably be a good idea to get rid of that built-in gutter and just put a regular gutter in. If you look out the window, you can see it's been tarred over the years, so it must have had problems.
And would we, does anything have to be done with the fellowship center downstairs that's already there?
I think just what needs to be done to put it back together because the scaffolding transfers, all the way down through the floor and into that basement area. So, the ceilings were opened up and everything. So I think just what needs to be done to kind of put it back together and make it usable again.
Chuck, had a question?
Yes, Joe.
Well, how many chairs, like, I can't count the number of, how many people can we seat?
We counted it the other night.
Yeah, it's 162 that this is set up for right here.
Yeah.
But as you can see, there's still lots more room at the back and even between the aisles and so on. And I think we have 200 chairs, Bob?
I don't know whether we got 200 or not, but we can always get more.
Yeah, but I think cause there's like 40 of more chairs in there, so,
Oh.
yeah, and there's still some over in the hub, and
Oh,
so we've got close to 200, so.
thank you.
Yeah, we're not maximizing this space. You can see in the back, there's still a lot of open area.
So I think, friends, as we, if there are any questions for Michael specifically for the plans, I think we can continue that, those questions. As we move to kind of the questions that we had asked you, I want to remind us in the Methodist Church, we have a history of what's called holy conferencing. So at every level of the church, from the local church, each of our committees, to the big global church at the General Conference, what we do is we meet in what's called holy conferencing. We are all Christians, we are all Methodists, we are all baptized believers, and so when we have discussions, sometimes they can get heated. And so to remind ourselves that we are doing this in a church, we are doing this because of a church, and we are doing this because we all care about the church. So as we continue in our conversation, and as we continue in the planning and the dreaming over the course of the next couple of months, I'm just going to keep reminding us that we are Christians first. We are Christians first, we are Methodists second, we are Marlton Methodists third. And so just to remind ourselves that first and foremost, we are all Christians, especially as we go into conversations of what works, what doesn't work, what do we want, what do we think would be best for the sanctuary or for the church or for our mission or for our service, just to keep that in the back of our minds. So there's a slide, and again, these questions were shared with you last week, they're also online. They were, what worked well in our previous sanctuary? What did you like when you were there? And please bear in mind that I've never worshiped in that space except for that Good Friday worship service I did last year. So please keep that in mind as you're sharing, to also share that with me. What works well in this space that we're in? What works well with this layout? With the coffee being available when we don't have COVID, things like that. And then as we reimagine our sanctuary space, what would be important to you to include that would enhance worship, that would support our missions and ministries, and would help us better connect with our community? And why? Because the why is the big importance. We might be able to do something a little bit different if we still understand what we're trying to get at its root. So let's pray real quick, and then we'll dive into this time to share and holy conferencing with one another. Gracious God, thank you for this blessing, that if we can save our roof, and if we can create this new structure, and if we can then imagine what it looks like to be the church in the 21st century, Lord, thank you. Lord, thank you as you have blessed us and you continue to bless us. And Lord, be with us in our time of conversation and our time of discernment. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for all that you have given us and all that you continue to give to us. And Lord, we ask that you bless our time and our conversation. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen. So friends, what worked well in the previous sanctuary? What works well now? And what would you like to see as we reimagine our space?
I love all the windows and natural light in our old sanctuary, and I'm glad to see that they look like they are still gonna be there and not gonna be covered up, for any reason, and I love the idea of the glass doors entering the architect.
So just ambient light, a lot of ambient light.
Yeah, I love the fact that, so I come from a church that is covered in stained glass windows. St. Peter's, it's all stained glass, and I love the natural light that we actually have in our spaces. And even here, when we kind of cover them a little bit, it's still very natural light. It's just not glaring as much. I think it's a great benefit.
I think preferably, I like this setup. I think it works great, the way we have it, transfer over there. And I don't know why what I call this anthem type of seating just feels more comfortable, less formal, and more welcoming. Whereas the rows, it's like, okay, you know, who has their, which we don't have pews anymore, but, you know, who has their pew, who sits where, this doesn't seem to fall into that same, although it could just be the times we're in that we don't have those things of, you know, whose pew is it?
Well, and someone told me recently that the great thing is, even if you're a back row seater, you're only like 20 feet away.
Right.
It's not even, you know, it's not like, oh, you're on the other side of the football field. You're 25 feet and you can still hear and see pretty well. And yet we can still pack you in here if we need to.
So since we're just on the topic of what worked well, right?
Or any of them.
Any one
Any
of
of
them.
them,
Any of
anyone.
them.
It's okay.
You gotta limit me now. So, if my mom, first of all, if my mom were here, I guarantee you she would have said amen to the natural light. So that would probably be the biggest thing for her. I know this is a minor thing, you're just kinda asking what worked well. And maybe it's cause I set up in the choir, but I always enjoyed that hanging thing that was up there by the choir or stuff. I know this isn't really important for the long-term architecture, but you remember that thing that was hanging in it, and you'd have the Advent candles on it,
Yeah.
and you could like praise the Lord? I just love that. I mean,
That was-
I like the traditional look, but I also like the modern look. So that's aside. But that, for some reason, that was one thing about MUMC that I hadn't really seen before that I like. Another thing about that space that I really like, that I feel is important is, of course, it had the large traditional cross, because and whether it's at an end or in the middle or whatever, I feel when it gets to be this small thing, we're maybe starting to lose focus, because when you have this much larger one, it doesn't have to be neon lighted or anything, right? But that's the reason we're all here. So, I really like having the very large cross at the end. But if we're gonna go into what we don't like, being a part of the choir, I absolutely hated the choir loft up there. It was horrendous, because we're facing 90 degrees, right? You know, I think that some way to get us around, like where the praise band is in here, or something. Somebody else was mentioning earlier, we need better table management and everything, but, yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that I like are like, things don't matter for why we're here today, other than like the natural lighting and stuff. We can deal with a lot of that later.
You know, things like ambient lighting is structural, right? Where you have windows, how many windows, you know. Across isn't necessarily structural per se, right? You don't have to build it into the.
Or we could.
You could. It was before, right? But it could also be something that's added later as well, but good point.
The one thing that I disliked about it was the lighting for the stage. I mean, it was very dark spots there. So if you're putting up something besides preaching, where there's a light on, you didn't have the good lighting. And if we're designing this so that we can do other things, whether it's dramatic, whether bringing different musical groups, whatever, we need to be able to do that. If we do the seating this way, are we still going to be able to put up the stage light as easily as if we put it at the end?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, we talked about everything being very flexible, so the lighting, if you have stage lighting, it's gonna need to be flexible also. It's gonna have to have like scheme A and scheme B if you are gonna do that. And just kind of putting in my thoughts is, as I develop this, you know, as an architect, you kind of develop preferences, and I do like the idea of expanding the narthex. I like the elevated sound booth. I think that would work well. You know, whether it's expanded for other needs, other people that might be there, and And I think the segmented arched beams is kind of a cleaner look, and I would lean towards that. But of course, it's up to the team and the church, but those are just kind of my druthers.
And those beams are gonna have a finish on them, I mean, they're gonna be
Oh, yeah, the intent is they would be clad, you know, they'd be furred out and clad. Clad in like a wood casing, you know.
The one thing to think about, as I'm thinking, if you had the sound booth at the back, but you had the stage set to the side, that's not as, from a sound person standpoint. You wanna be behind, so you can see and hear, and you be on the side, it might be a little awkward, but those are all things we can work out.
I mean, there's also, newer technology, you know, even our soundboard, you can control it from an iPad, from
somebody
anywhere
sit
you want.
behind.
So yeah, that would be the other option, is we could also have our sound guys, you know, be able to walk around and
Right.
check levels and then go back up where the video guys are, cause that doesn't really matter where you're located.
How about the narthex area, you know, we've shown options, keep it the way it is, expand it. The thought there being, again, it's more welcoming, right? If you go to, let's say, modern churches, you know, that area where you enter the church, there's a lot of activity there. There's a lot of space for people to do things. We don't really have that right now. It's pretty tight in there.
Hey, Tim.
I consider your narthex that you had over there to be very large, and I've seen hundreds of churches. So, I'm used to much smaller narthexes than that. I'm not opposed to making it larger, I'm just saying, I considered it to be very large, actually.
Tim, one of the things that I like that we were talking about within our team with expanding that was there was discussions around whether we needed family rooms or not family rooms, but we said if you had an expanded narthex, we could have the same video boards in there, sound system, so if somebody felt the need to step out, they could be in the narthex and they could still hear and see what was going on.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
And those could be
a sound room or something, you know, steal some space.
in the center and to the side. You could have glass doors, you know, kind of lining up with the glass doors in the front of the church. So if somebody does need to step out, you know, you can have sound in there or monitor, but also people would be able to see through those doors to what's going on, if they do have a need to leave the sanctuary.
I love the idea of the expanded narthex. Yep.
Melissa and then,
The electrical's gonna be really important, I think, too, and you probably thought about that already, right? With all of the absurd amount of cords and outlets and everything is just, it's a little out of control up there, so I think that's gotta, I'm sure everybody who's on the worship team understands that gets very,
But, and you should see the booth in the back, it's ridiculous.
yeah.
I don't know what can be done about the electrical, but making it so there's not 800 cords lying around on the stage or, you know.
Yeah, well, so much had to get run, and thank
Yeah.
goodness for Pastor Jesse, because he was able to run those white tubings, because otherwise those would be hanging
Oh, yeah.
wherever as well, you know, so, yes,
I don't
well.
know how you.
Thank you for pointing them out, I don't think anyone ever noticed them.
Oh, I look at them fondly every week. I love them, because otherwise those would be on the floor, and we'd be
Exactly.
walking over
That's
them, or
right.
we'd have rugs over them, or tape.
Right.
And
the
all
most
that, so.
convenient, most condensed, cleanest way.
Yes,
I'll have the electrical with the, all of the setup for people. But I do like I like that there's a kids, going back to what we really like about the introduction of the kids table at the front here. It's a great idea. I think you can do that easily with either option, obviously. But, I did like that. I think we could, you know, when we bought this up front, I thought it made a big difference. It was really great for a lot of families.
Well, and there's also, there's a theological reason why it's up
Right.
here. I do want everyone to know that. Theologically speaking, what's up front is what's important. That's why the Lord's table's in the center and the pulpit's on the side, because communion and the Lord's table is actually more important than the sermon. And then that's also why I keep the baptismal font up all the time, because it's important for us to see. Having the kids up front, the closer they are to the action, the more they're paying attention, which is true. I get colorings from the kids all the time, and it's usually about either something I said, the children's message, or something I'm doing, because they're paying attention. They're up front and they're watching and they're listening and they're hearing and they're paying attention. So yeah, it's not going anywhere. Sorry. We're just gonna make it better. That's the difference.
Everybody loves it.
Alyssa.
Yeah, so, I mean, to build off of that, I like the program, I think the program's important. I think the expansion of the narthex also holds a lot of possibility in terms of creating a crying room for babies, and maybe having it wired in so that, or a clear glass so that they can still be involved and see worship, but it's soundproof and no one else necessarily hears the baby. Or even creating a smaller nursery space for the younger children who may not be ready for the program yet, but having a space for them where they can be and be safe, but still be a part of worship.
That would be the one thing I'd say would work well, at least not being a parent. I feel like having the nursery so close to the sanctuary works really well. It's in the same building, right? It's, okay, here's your kid, we go upstairs and here's church. I don't know how it was when we were in the other sanctuary, but it feels like, okay, we're going to a different building with your child now. And I don't know how that felt, but keeping it close, I think, to the sanctuary might be a better, might be an option that would also make sense. Because you can also see it, it's close by. Especially for new families, that might be helpful.
Yeah, it provides that safe space.
What I like about here is there's bathrooms here. Where would the bathroom be in the new place?
Well, I don't-
Go all the way over to another building? Or
Yes.
go down to the basement?
I don't think we're
I
voting.
think it's nice that bathrooms are here, but it's also a little weird when we hear a flush in the middle.
Thank you, Chris.
A well-timed sermon flush is always good.
Kathy, it's likely that we'll continue to use the ones in the discipleship center, because I don't know that we had discussed or even have a space to be able to build them closer to the sanctuary itself. But then the difference too, though, is, and we use those all the time, and it's flatter, right? So you don't feel like you're going up and down stairs, you're going around and all of that. It's just kind of a cut across and make a right. So, I mean, we'll take that under advisement, but I don't know that we have a place to build any others,
But there's bathrooms down in the basement area.
which we shouldn't encourage anyone to use.
Yeah.
They're old and awful.
And as Michael said, you can drive on that floor, which makes it very complicated to put things underneath it. You'd have to take out sections of floor to make that work, to put facilities
Yeah.
up there.
I mean, you could get to those bathrooms closer from the staircase that we're talking about getting rid of, but I certainly wouldn't be one that voted for, let's keep the stairs so we can use those hideous bathrooms, so.
They're little children.
Now, maybe we can upgrade them as part of this process, I'm not sure. What the funding would be like for that, the cost, and whether we'd have enough to do something to upgrade those, because it is always good to have, you can't ever have too many bathrooms, quite frankly, but, I know we can't get any closer to the space.
I think it's worth looking into, to have sort of like a convenience family bathroom that's closer, so. I will look at it and see, and discuss it with the team.
Any other
I like
comments?
these. I like monitors over the projection system that we had. We had that huge screen that came down. which was nice, but then it blocked out the cross.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so I think this gives us, I mean, maybe we have to get bigger ones for in there, which is fine, but it gives us some flexibility to be able to use it for something other than bringing out the projector and the looking up and all of that.
I'm all for state of the art, as
Yeah.
far as the music goes, as far as everything, make it as modern from that standpoint as possible.
Yeah, I guess the big thing for me is just to remember that whatever we use that space for, it's not all just about us going in there on Sunday morning. That's actually a small portion of what I consider that space to be for. It needs to be for weddings, it needs to be for funerals, it needs to be for baptisms, it needs to be for other events. It could be the South Jersey Pops or the Boy Scouts, but just Sunday mornings is not everything that space is about.
Sure.
Exactly.
Now, Michael, for one of the options you had this set up with almost a step or two kind of in a circle. You know, so the big reason we had a stage in this room, and then I came and we had to get rid of it because I kept falling off of it. Because I paced too much, right? This is something we know. But if it was easily movable and big enough so I didn't keep falling, would that be something then we could kind of move, you know, from this way to a wedding format, or you know, back to, you know, do they have movable? You were talking about movable stages that sometimes get used.
Yeah, they do have them, and they come in all sizes and configurations, but if it's something as simple as one step up, you know, one or two steps up, then yeah, there could be something that you could purchase, and you can find these things online, you know, under church products and see what the options are, but yeah, it's definitely doable.
I mean, so the only thing that I'm just gonna push the congregation, because it's my job to, is accessibility. And so either finding something with a ramp, or I would also love, and this might be out of scope, but to build a ramp out front. I know we have the elevator, but everyone's going in one door, and then if you have to go in a different door, it creates two different classes of people. And I wonder if kind of more accessibility, or to keep an eye on accessibility might also is an important thing that we should do.
The concept drawings didn't show it, because you didn't know if it was gonna be temporary or permanent, but any kind of permanent stage would need to be handicap accessible. And even if it's a temporary stage, I haven't looked into this, but I'm pretty sure they would come with or you could get a ramp as an option. And if it's only 2 steps up, then you're only talking about like a 12-foot ramp.
Well, you were referring to outside, right?
Well, and then, yeah, just to blow up the project, you know, to maybe long-term think about one out front as well.
Yeah, there are, I'd have to look at it, but there are opportunities out there, and we had walked around that night and talked about how, you know, some things need to be fixed up there and upgraded. And you do have the planting beds to the side, and you just have lawn to the right, so there is opportunity for a ramp there, a permanent ramp. And it's true, everybody, yeah, that's the sort of the guiding principle in making buildings handicap accessible, is everybody should be able to come through the same door.
Are there any other thoughts anybody had, or anything you want to share as we wrap our time here?
Go ahead, Chris.
Just wondering, at what point do we need to decide on what the ceiling will look like inside the sanctuary? I have a feeling probably we'll be a little divided on that. I personally like the more, open truss work, that as long as it looks like it's clad in wood or something, not too industrial, I think that looks more homey and cozy somehow. I don't know, I like that look, but I'm sure that there are varying opinions on that, so.
That's the straight across one that
No.
had
Yeah.
the encased,
Yeah,
okay.
at what point do we need to make a decision on that?
Well, that, I think I mentioned earlier, the expanding the narthex and the roof configuration need to be decided before we go to working drawings. So that's really kind of up to your schedule. If you want to start construction this year, then that would be pretty soon to make that decision.
Yeah, we'll figure out the next steps, coming out of this meeting, and I'm not hearing anybody, say, I don't like any of it, we want something completely different, but, so it sounds like, we've got some things here to talk about and start to move forward, but you're right, we wanna move to the next phase of design, which is getting into design drawings where those decisions have to be made. Again, the interior stuff are things we can continue to talk about even after the design drawings are done, but, some of them, like the layouts of things, but those main elements like the narthex, the roof system have to be decided. So we'll be continuing to communicate with you as we go forward.
So as far as process goes, and I think this is also a good update for everyone. So we have voted on and have a building committee. The building committee works specifically with the architect up to the point, after we have construction drawings, we kind of hit it's like a pressure break. We bring that to a full church conference meeting, and then that's when we say, okay, here are the full detailed construction plans. Here's how much we think it's gonna cost. We're gonna reach out and start finding bids for builders, and we're gonna direct the board of trustees to take out a mortgage. That's actually the next kind of church-wide step. In the meantime, it's actually the building committee, through consensus with the larger church, but it's the building committee and the architect who continue to move forward. And so the building committee is specifically Lisa, Tim, and Steve. So if you have a specific, I don't like it and here's why, X, Y, and Z, bring it to one of them, but they are the ones who make kind of that decision, outside of a consensus to actually work with Michael moving forward.
And on the website, under the sanctuary rebuild tab, there's actually a questions and inquiry form that you can use if you want to submit additional comments, or as soon as you leave here, you think of another question, and we'll be able to share those with Michael, or you can email or call or whatever. But if you just think of it at, in the middle of the night, like I do, you can just go on there and submit a question or some additional comments, or forgot to tell you that we really like this thing about the sanctuary or the worship space or something like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you again to the three of you.
Anything?
And you.
All right.
Okay.
Well, we'd like to thank Michael Campbell for joining us today and answering all our questions. And we'll be in touch. All right, thank you all for staying and being so thoughtful and helpful in our thinking about this as we go forward.
Not being loud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You too.
They are upset.
So,
Oh, they just unplugged, all right.
I got whether they were, I knew they're there. I know that they always had that.
Yeah.
That just seemed to always get.
I'm not even sure
Having the organ, the organ is electric, so it's boom, it can go anywhere.
Home church has a real pipe.
Yeah.
Here, wider than what we have here.
He said they're the same. He said the dimensions are pretty, yeah, much the same. Yes, yeah. Narthex means entrance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Laying in bed, thinking about you know, I'm going to steel into the concrete and going up and just building it up. You know, and it is, and I. Oh, really? That's exactly.
So, yeah.
That's what we're doing, we're just doing it steel.
That's a whole other conversation that we're gonna have.
Yeah, it just, I mean, I've been dealing with this.
That's a whole separate part of the conversation. We're gonna have that later. It's actually, I would argue, council, you know, and maybe we should start there. Oh, yeah, and you stay after church for an hour apart. Big Steve.
Stevens is on Valentine's Day. His is coming up.
I'm impressed, you know, your thoughts and how you feel it.
And do you think the I don't know if you're familiar to post a Super Bowl party?
I was at a church yesterday, but